Welcome to TCN Talks. The goal of our podcast is to provide concise and relevant information for busy hospice and palliative care leaders and staff. We understand your busy schedules and believe that brevity signals respect. And now, here's our host, Chris Como.
Hello and welcome to TCN Talks. This is my favorite time of the month when Mark Cohen and I go over what are the top news stories of the month. So welcome, Mark. Good to have you back.
Thank you, Chris. Always a pleasure.
And Mark, I started last month, and I want to continue with kind of that vein in the beginning, since we've heard a lot of good stuff about your story, but you've got so much great advice and wisdom. In fact, I got some really cool feedback of your, like, I felt like it was like, you know, like a professor holding forth like a master's class last month. So what advice or wisdom, Mark, from your years of experience that would be helpful to our listeners?
Well, rarely a month goes by when there isn't a negative story about a provider somewhere. So this month, Chris, I'd like to talk about the topic of no comment in response to a controversial or negative situation. It's a particular sore point for me, Chris. Sharp readers of Hospice News today likely have noticed that I never fail to mention when a provider under negative scrutiny either responds with a no comment or fails to respond at all to a media request for comment. And that's because I'm trying to make the point, I'm trying to send the lesson that even in a legal matter, no comment is never a successful public relations, media relations, reputation management strategy. You might as well just hang a guilty sign around your neck if you're going to no comment. Instead, there's almost always a way to say something in a no comment situation, even if the statement itself doesn't really say anything. Now, legal counsel will almost always advise a no comment strategy, but keep in mind that legal counsel is solely concerned with winning in the court of law and is really not concerned about winning in the court of public opinion.
That is well said.
For example,
I just want to give you kudos. That is very well said. Keep going.
Thank you. For example, when a lawsuit is filed alleging negligent care, the plaintiff's attorney often will file the suit minutes before the clerk's office closes at the end of the day, and then dump a press release on local media, no doubt causing an overexcited reporter to call after business hours seeking immediate comment from you, even before you've been served with a copy of the lawsuit. And it's worth noting that many reporters seem to enjoy writing things like, quote, "The hospice did not respond to a request for comment before publication deadline," unquote. So what can you say? You can and you ought to say things like this. Plaintiff's attorney has every interest in trying this case in the media, but that is not the proper venue, and we choose not to play this litigator's games. And by inference, you're saying, and we're sorry to see that your publication is willing to play this litigator's games. Another option, another way to respond, it's worth noting that the media received the news release before we've been served with the suit. Is this about a legitimate legal case, or is this just a publicity stunt? And one more, it's a cliche to state that we can't comment because we have not yet seen this lawsuit. But just because it's a cliche doesn't make it any less true. Plaintiff's attorney is clearly most interested in the public relations aspect of this case. None of those three responses should give legal counsel heartburn. All are much better than a cowardly no comment. So I'll wrap up with what I said at the beginning. There's almost always something better to say than no comment or not responding at all.
Thank you to our TCN Talks sponsor, Delta Care RX. Delta Care RX is also the title sponsor for our May and November 2023 Leadership Immersion courses. Delta Care RX is primarily known as a national hospice, PBM, and prescription mail order company. Delta Care RX is a premier vendor of TCN and provides not only pharmaceutical care, but also niche software innovations that save their customers time, stress, and money. Thank you, Delta Care RX, for all the great work you do in end-of-life and serious illness care.
Your thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, that is well said, Mark. In fact, now that I've got a little bit of gray hair, so I got a little bit of wisdom and years of experience. And the way you think about it is just like an interdisciplinary team. That attorney has got a purview and they do want to win the case. But we live at a time when, especially, people are just give me the bite size, and that bite size could haunt you forever because especially organizations we work with, you've built 30, 40 years of reputation in your community, and one little bite size thing like that could destroy you. So I wholeheartedly agree, Mark. I think, again, that was a master's class. And I think it really does help people see that it is kind of lazy. And then just listening to the attorney, and the attorney has got their purview, kind of their area where they want to work in. But man, the court of public opinion could harm you for many years to come if you don't do something. So thanks for that.
You're welcome.
All right,
Okay,
Mark. So yeah, you want to jump in?
Let's jump into the top 10. Once again, news about long-term care and senior living led the news coverage in Hospice News Today in September with 53 articles that I read. And that was anything but good news for the senior living industry. The fight over the proposed federal staffing minimums was the dominant theme of the coverage, including the leak of a CMS report that called into question the staffing minimums the government is backing, along with dire warnings about how many nursing home beds would have to be closed if the proposed staffing minimums actually go into effect. Outside of the staffing war, there was a poll released that quantified public revulsion at the thought of having to admit a loved one to a nursing home. And amid the coverage of staffing shortages in SNFs, a new shortage emerged, a shortage of qualified staff to conduct state-level inspections of nursing homes. End-of-life care and palliative care coverage was in second position with 40 articles in the newsletter in September. There was no dominant theme here. There were a fair number of articles about death doulas and the broader death positive movement, and a fair number of byline columns by writers documenting their loved one's end-of-life journey, which is something I've been seeing a bit more of in recent months. General hospice news was the third most common subject in September in Hospice News Today. There were 34 articles. The most important coverage involved the regulatory reforms announced by CMS and the efforts by industry advocates to shape those reforms. And yes, I said industry. The singular voice with which NHPCO, NAHC, MPHI, and Leading Age have been attempting to speak even got noticed with this article in the trade publication Hospice News. How the four largest hospice industry groups work together to support program integrity. There were a few too many stories in this category about hospice nurses diverting drugs, and there was one troubling story about a Black hospice nurse who turned into the wrong driveway in rural Georgia and was chased by the gun-wielding apparent homeowner of that residence. In fourth position this month was news about fundraising and development with 29 articles. There were announcements of a couple of large grants, reports of some big fundraising events, and several articles about ongoing hospice regattas. It was a nice bump in coverage like this in the month of September for nonprofit hospice fundraising activities. Also with 29 articles last month, in fifth position were labor issues. Again, nurses voting to strike, nurses issuing mandatory 10-day warnings of strikes, nurses going on strike. As we've seen month after month, this increased union activity is due, at least in part, to the stresses exacerbated by the public health emergency. In addition, there was a report from California that the state is moving closer toward adopting a $25 an hour minimum wage for healthcare workers. As with most things related to organized labor and healthcare, what starts on the West Coast can eventually bleed back to the East. Right behind labor, with 27 articles in Hospice News Today last month, was news about not-for-profit hospice providers. Perhaps most important was the 50th anniversary of Connecticut Hospice, a heartwarming story about the nation's first hospice provider. Closing the loop on a controversy from earlier this summer, the Alive Hospice Board in Nashville at the end of the month added 4 new members to its board. They were all members of the group that publicly lobbied against the sale of Alive to the for-profit provider Amedisys. And on the subject of M&A, there were also 27 articles on that subject in September. In terms of dollars, the most impactful news was the expected announcement that the Amedisys board had approved its sale to Optum For not-for-profits, the news that one of the nation's oldest hospices, By the Bay Health in California's wine country, announced its intent to merge with Mission Health in the southern portions of the Bay Area. That was probably most significant among not-for-profits. And the for-profit post-acute providers continue to announce one-off and two-off acquisitions of nursing homes, home health agencies, and a few for-profit hospice providers. Home health and private duty news coverage was eighth with 22 articles in September. The initiatives by Best Buy, CVS, Walgreens, and Humana to move into home-based care in various iterations received significant coverage last month, largely as a result of comments those company leaders made at either investor conferences or in public forums staged by trade publications. In ninth position, we saw 21 articles about grief and bereavement. As with August, the most striking coverage involved personal essays about an individual's own grief journey, and there were still a few more articles about butterfly releases and one more article about a wind phone. Finally, physician-assisted suicide and medical aid in dying brought up the rear for the top 10. A couple of patients and physicians filed suit in New Jersey to open the state's medical aid in dying law to those from outside the state, which mirrors earlier successful efforts in Vermont and Oregon. A poll in Scotland demonstrated overwhelming support, popular support there, for a measure that remains blocked at the legislative level, and controversy continues to swirl around Canada's and Quebec's liberalized medical aid in dying laws. Honorable mention was not anywhere near as interesting or distinctive. My half dozen for the month of September were hospital news with 17 articles, Medicare news with 16 articles, physician and nursing news with 15 articles, news about for-profit providers with 13 articles, news about elder care with 9 articles, and news about cyber attacks and ransomware attacks on hospitals at 8 articles. Hospital news was more the same and almost all bad. Layoffs, both large and small, hospitals warning of dire financial prospects, and the ongoing challenges to the future of rural hospitals in states like Mississippi. The Medicare coverage was dominated by ACOs. Amid the coverage of physician and nurse burnout, there was an ominous warning about whether we are reaching a tipping point in terms of the shortage of primary care physicians. And the dominant story among coverage of the large for-profits was the CEO transition at Accent Care. Worth mentioning, while there were only 6 articles last month about President Carter's hospice journey, all of them were picked up widely and reached tens of millions of viewers and readers, continuing the trend of one man's hospice journey generating incalculable public relations goodwill for hospice providers everywhere. Coverage of COVID-19, which had largely disappeared over the summer, came back with 6 articles on its own. That's a trend definitely worth keeping an eye on. Also worth noting are the categories that saw limited coverage last month. I ran only 4 articles about hospices fulfilling patient wishes and dreams. PACE fell back to 4 articles as well. And I ran only 2 articles about veterans' pinnings. News about medical marijuana disappeared with only 3 mentions in the newsletter. There certainly was a lot more coverage than that, but it mostly was about fights in red states over licensing and regulatory issues, anything to slow the implementation of medical marijuana laws that have been approved either by voters and or by legislatures. On the somewhat good news side, there were no articles about the negatives facing not-for-profits, and the single article I ran about not-for-profits involved a thriving public hospital system, which is considering converting to a private not-for-profit. That's a quantitative look at September, Chris. What did you see from your perch qualitatively in the C-suite?
Yeah, so and it's interesting, Mark, when you and I were doing show prep, I asked you, and you said, when I said, was the quantity more this month? And you said what, Mark? You said it was kind of a moderate
Not really,
month.
kind of moderate.
Which is interesting. Because for me, this is the most articles I flagged. And so I love us doing this because you're coming from it from a quantitative standpoint. I'm trying to come at it from a standpoint of what do C-suite leaders need to know? So this is the most I've ever flagged at 100 articles. Here are the categories, and then I'll go back through the detail. First categories, I felt there's some beautiful what I call mission moments this month. And of course, President Carter had several articles in that category. But there's another category that I just called end of life interesting. Like there's an article that you actually ran about basically end of life or a funeral home conference in Las Vegas. And there were some interesting pearls in that one, so I'll come back to that one. The third category I would call regulatory and just kind of DC type news. And then the fourth category I would call palliative care and physicians and providers. There's several articles. And another one that I would call interesting statistics that I just wanted to call out. Then, of course, Medicare Advantage is another key category as we go into the future of more and more Medicare Advantage. Of course, mergers and acquisitions and consolidations. That would be kind of I think that's my sixth category. Then I would call there is a larger group this month of innovations. In fact, the kind of mergers and acquisitions was a little bit smaller than what I would call innovations. And then troubling signs in healthcare. And I had, probably close to 20 articles in this category. It's interesting. What I love is when you do your quantitative, I'm always looking, is there something that I missed that Mark actually pointed out? It's just that we're kind of putting them in different categories. So troubling signs of healthcare, a lot of stuff in the nursing homes and hospitals in that category. And then one category that's coming up every month, but now I'm starting to kind of stratify it in two different, which is all the staffing challenges. So the first half of staffing challenges is just the challenges. The second half is what I love that I think probably about 90 days ago I started to notice more articles about what are the solutions. So that's my kind of second subcategory that rounds out my top 10. And then I've got a bunch of honorable mentions. So if it's okay, Mark, I'm going to kind of jump into those. So the first one's under kind of the mission, what I would call the mission moments. You called it as well. Our team kind of passed this one around, but the Connecticut Hospice, them celebrating the 50 years and just citing what Florence Wald, this was our first hospice in the United States. It was just such a well-done article and just really kind of harken back to our roots in hospice. Several people I know throughout the network kind of paid that one forward. So that was really good. Another one, hospice care can begin months, not just days before the end of life. It's about V&A Health encourages Santa Barbara residents to explore their options. Always trying to help educate people. I just thought it was a well-done article. Good friend Kieran Shaw was actually quoted in that article. So helping educate people better. That's not like don't choose hospice just in the last days. And I love the title of this one, Jimmy Carter's Final Chapter, Peanut Butter Ice Cream and His 99th Birthday. So just a really great article about just President Carter, and now he's over 6 months in hospice care, which is great. This next one, Hold Your Memory, What Hospice Workers Learned About Saying Goodbye. And they had really some great tips. Keep 5 phrases in mind, which goes back to Ira Byock. I forgive you, please forgive me, thank you, I love you, and goodbye. Be present in the moment. Requests may have deeper meanings, especially around food. Remember the scope of the world. And so just some great tips around what hospice workers learned about saying goodbye and paying that forward to people. Just good wisdom. They had a couple other kind of Jimmy Carter articles, and there was a Washington Post article. As my end nears, I crave the soul-to-soul connection of seeing friends in person. And so, it just always reminds me as I was reading this article, Tina Gentry, who's on our team, used to always have this wonderful way of saying, when people kind of understand hospice, I know some of you are just listening, but I'm pointing to my brain. But once you experience hospice and palliative care, it's just a much deeper connection to what this work means. And when people are confronted with their mortality, just the beautiful things that can occur, at least the opportunity that we have to make a canvas for those beautiful things that occur in hospice and palliative care. So I thought that was a great Washington Post article. So it was my first category. I just call it kind of mission moments. Second category, I would just call end of life interesting. There's a blog by a hospice physician, Don't Disrupt Success in Medicare, which is really great article about just the good things within hospice. There's a BuzzFeed article, End of Life Workers are sharing the major things we get wrong about death, almost kind of like a Mythbusters type article. New York Times, Caring for America's Aging Seniors at Home. And so I thought that was a really good article. And then the Las Vegas Review Journal, Cookies and Corpses. inside the world's largest, biggest death convention. So let me kind of want to pull, there was a couple of really good ones. I just thought, usually I won't call out stuff like that, but there's just some interesting stuff in here. But one of the interesting things is that there were no caskets at this conference, which just kind of shows you, and there's a statistic, 65% now nationally favor cremation instead of your standard burial. That just, for me, I kind of sensed that or kind of thought that, but just to read it in that article. So just kudos, Mark. You always kind of point out some stuff that just have some little pearls in it. Then McKnight's Senior Living Intergenerational Programs, Combat Loneliness and Ageism. Thought that was great and really kind of reminded me of Atul Gawande's book about being mortal. Some great stuff in there about intergenerational programs. And then in the Atlantic, where end-of-life care falls short for African Americans. And so some really great pearls in there about the challenge of getting end-of-life care in the African American community. Then McKnight's article, Lack of Social Support Threatens Older Adult Health, and just talking about a lot of the social determinants challenges. And then Grief and Bereavement, you probably cited this one, but the title really grabbed me. His Three Daughters review, Grief is a Real Bitch. And just, it was a very raw article about grief and bereavement. Another article, Exacerbating Decline in Access, LHC Group and Habit, Beata, sound off on CMS. Oh, I'm sorry. Now I'm segueing to the next one. My bad. So this is the third category, which is regulatory in DC. So now I've kind of segued from kind of the end of life interesting. So several articles about regulatory stuff. So LHC Group and Habit, Beata, sound off on CMS's proposed rate cuts. Hospice News appellate ruling in Care Alternatives FCA case may set a new precedent. That is going to be a very interesting case to see how it comes out. That could have some pretty big implications on the future of especially, determinants of the people die when they were supposed to die. McKnight's Fraudulent Medicare Marketing Disproportionately Targets Lower Income Adults. That was an interesting article I kind of put under regulatory. Senators give nod to hospital at home and ACOs at home health hearing. And so, we're getting up on the time that hospital at home kind of came during COVID, and senators are giving the nod that they want it to continue, which is always thought in a way as kind of a disruptive. It could be a co-opetition. It could be a disruptive innovation to end-of-life care, palliative care in the home, or it could be an interesting opportunity to collaborate. And we've certainly, I think you and I have talked about that a little bit in the past. Another McKnight's article, Nursing Home Ownership Changes Do Not Cause Erosion in Quality of Care. So it's interesting. I think probably some of the whole kind of articles about, the private equity and the for-profits and the flipping of companies. They did a study that nursing home ownership changes did not actually erode care quality, which is probably the end, not exactly the outcome I would have thought if they've done the study. So that was kind of interesting.
The study did say that it was declining quality before the sale, which often led to the sale. So the declining quality was an indicator of an upcoming sale, not an indicator of additional quality decline after the sale. So the buyers were buying low rent homes, basically.
Yes. Man, the whole there's just a lot of red flags in the whole nursing center area, which I'm going to get to in a little bit in like the kind of ominous thing. So thanks for that correction, Mark. So new CMS rules could impact hospice providers. So this is about the upcoming or proposed rules about the SFP, revisions to propose hospice SFP home health rule provisions. Policy experts call for changes, compromise to staffing proposal for nursing homes. A lot of articles about now that these staffing regulations, which, you can't regulate the fact that there are not enough people in nursing homes. It's just pretty disastrous for them. So that was my third category. The fourth category I would call kind of palliative care physicians and providers. There were several. There was a KFF, shrinking number of primary care physicians is reaching a tipping point. You called that one out, Mark. 1 in 9 telehealth visits need timely in-person follow-up care, report claims. So telehealth is not a panacea. Global Partners in Care program fosters international collaboration in palliative care. The role of Medicare Advantage in growing palliative care services. So that's kind of a category for me. Then this next one I would just call interesting statistics. And this is from McKnight's. In 2021, estimated fatal falls among older adults rose to the highest in 20 years. So that may be indicative of staffing, just, clinical challenges. And then end of life, this was in Forbes, the most expensive states to die in that were actually ranked. And number 1 was Alaska, number 2, Hawaii, number 3, Massachusetts, number 4, New Hampshire, number 5, Washington, number 6, California, number 7, New York, number 8, Connecticut, number 9, Vermont, and then rounding out the number 10 was Rhode Island. So that was an interesting statistical article. So then going to my next category, which I would just call Medicare Advantage, there's just a lot of articles. Scan CEO had a couple articles about middlemen are a growing problem in healthcare. Medicare Advantage supplement benefits on the rise. How many rural beneficiaries may not be able to access those supplemental benefits? This was interesting. About half of Medicare Advantage beneficiaries leave their plan after 5 years. I thought that was really interesting. United Healthcare, this is a Modern Healthcare article. United Healthcare to scrap some Medicare Advantage plans. And then how rural hospitals are fighting Medicare Advantage. And Mark, I think you and I talked about that last month in some states, how Medicare Advantage is literally kind of rural hospitals already kind of teetering on the edge and kind of pushing them over the edge. And then don't wait to start working with MA plans, payers to hospices. And then the last one, again, another Sanchin Jan article from SCAN, CEO of SCAN, healthcare middlemen contribute to the system's fragmentation. So you had a couple. So that was my 6th category. My 7th category, I would actually call mergers, acquisitions, consolidation. So pretty big one, Empath Health and Trust Bridge to pursue affiliation. Amedisys shareholders okay the United Healthcare deal. This is Modern Healthcare article. The healthcare industry divided over draft merger guidelines. That was really interesting. One about how Epic took over the hospital EHR market. They had a really great graph in that about showing, it really surprised me of how much Epic, in fact, let me go ahead and just open up that article real quick. And so in that graph in that article, well, darn it. But basically Epic's market share is almost 36%. And the second closest competitor is Cerner, which is now part of Oracle. So 36%. And I don't think we have anything like that yet in the hospice space. And then also months after uproar over potential sale, Nashville is a live hospice CEO talks about the future. Healthcare acquires Advantage Care Home Health, looks to stay active in normalizing the M&A market. This hospital conversions, Lee Health looking at converting to a private nonprofit entity. So you called that one out too, Mark. I thought that was really interesting. And then McKnight Senior Living, 2 more operators announce affiliation plans. And then some states back hospital mergers despite record or service cuts and price hikes. So that was my 7th category. And then my 8th category was a bunch of articles about what I would call innovations. So Best Buy leaders hope that home-based health initiatives will drive the future. Walgreens, this is a home health care news. Walgreens will leverage CareCentrix for a hospital home and new partnership. Another article about how Amedisys, Walgreens, and Intermountain Healthcare are building 360-degree home-based care models. Another article, how LHC Group, Compassus, and Choice Health at home are building next-generation home health platforms. This one about InnovAge, how InnovAge plans to elevate the PACE model to above best kept secret. Amazon expands telehealth offerings now to 50 states in the company's latest healthcare move. Homecare Daily, Best Buy grows partnership with Geisinger around remote patient monitoring. This was interesting. Senior living university partnerships address the future of aging. So like some senior living communities partnering actually with universities, maybe even building CCRCs close by or on campus. I thought that was really innovative. And then Humana's CenterWell primary care joins Move into the home. And so expanding as Humana expands their CenterWell. Walgreens continues its big bet on healthcare, Village MD clinics. And then referral giant, A Place for Mom, enters the nursing home market with a whole new website launch. So that was my 8th category, what I would call innovations. And then this next category, I'll just call it troubling signs. And so bankruptcy, life and death situation, lawmakers battle Wall Street over healthcare. That was a Political article. Sniff News today, Biden's nursing home staffing fix is not enough. Poll shows public's deep aversion to nursing homes. 42% of Americans give it a D or F. I think you called that one out too, Mark. There's a Wall Street Journal article, Hospital Distress Worsens Amid Labor Scarcity and Inflation. You have warned us for a while, Mark, that if our hospitals start to catch the flu, and I'd say that flu is definitely a pretty good analogy. A lot of hospitals are struggling. What does that mean for all of us and the other in the kind of the post-acute realm of healthcare? It's an Axios article, Medicaid unwinding and fewer outpatient procedures are squeezing hospitals. This is a KFF article. CMS study sabotages efforts to bolster the nursing home staffing. And then this is also a KFF, fewer than 1 in 5 nursing homes could meet the federal staffing proposal. Again, troubling signs on the horizon. Increased staffing for nursing homes, sure, but the lack of oversight is deplorable. This one, McKnight, recession could exacerbate deteriorating outlook for CCRCs, so beyond nursing homes. More hospitals to be charged readmission penalties. Rural nursing home operators say that new staff rules will cause more closures. And then in New Jersey, nursing home forces emergency relocation of 70 elderly residents in one day as that nursing home shut down. Because I've talked to my peers and just some of these storm clouds for the skilled nursing industry, and like, what do you do if they close? Well, here's a situation where literally no notice and trying to locate 70 residents in one day. Nursing home industry leaders question leaked CMS staffing data, worry about more shortages. Skilled nursing with COVID cases on the rise in nursing homes, related deaths of 80% in August. And then this is interesting, Mark, and I think you kind of called this out earlier. We're seeing more and more unionization in healthcare. So 3 years after the pandemic, lawsuits, this one is actually about more unionization, but then there's another one about lawsuits over nursing home deaths 3 years after the pandemic. And then, nursing home staff requirements, what will change? So that's just some kind of troubling signs in healthcare. So this last category seems to be my every month. I may move this to my number 1 each month, but just the staffing challenges. But I've also stratified them. The first half is just here's the challenges. Second half are people starting to offer up solutions. So staffing mandate proposal inherently flawed with complete disrespect to LPNs, which is puzzling considering the staffing shortage. American hospitals struggle with increasing shortage of nurses. 900,000 more home care workers are needed by 2031. So put an actual number on it. Modern healthcare unions seeing increased interest. And so, again, I think you called that out earlier this year, Mark, that we're going to see that. McKnight senior living demand for healthcare workers still outpaces supply. Nursing school enrollment declines. That's not a good sign when we need more workers. And then at OHSU, nurses overwhelmingly authorized team to call first strike in over 20 years. So again, we're kind of seeing this confluence of challenges of there's no easy solution. So you're seeing unionization, and I can't remember seeing a lot of strikes at the same time. And so that certainly is something new in my healthcare career, Mark. So now moving to the solution side, Alera Caring leverages tech to achieve 21% hiring increase. How the right investments can help hospices reduce turnover. That was labor hospice news. LA Times, much needed nurses are flocking to California for some of the same reasons others are fleeing, but just the incredible salaries that are being commanded in California, Mark, and why it's actually attracting healthcare people there. Hospice companies are beating the workforce shortage, a good article there. Senior living immigration, a possible answer to the demographic drought draining the state's workforce. A McKnight's article, older workers satisfied with work, but many encounter ageism in job search. I do believe, Mark, that your generation wanting to work when they want to work is kind of an untapped resource as we go into the future. Senior living program lets high school students pick up credit and a paycheck and interest in senior living. Senior living school career exploration programs help cultivate future workforce. Then a Modern Healthcare article, Health Systems Turning to Gig Nurses to Ease the Staffing Issues. And then one final one, Modern Healthcare, More States Tap Family Members to Solve the Nursing Shortage. So you've got a great person. Hey, do you get anybody else in your family that's looking to come in healthcare? So those are my top 10. And then my honorable mentions, Mark, MPHI, Tom Kasumpsis, was named as a top innovator by Modern Healthcare. Congratulations to Tom. Good friend of yours, good friend of mine, and a lot of community-based nonprofits throughout the country. This was interesting. 5 wishes and my directives are enhancing the future of digital advanced care planning. That's one I want to look a lot more into. In a Washington Post article made my honorable mention, psychedelics have great medical promise, though that doesn't make them safe. And then John Hopkins, Mark, you and I have called out a lot amongst just the cybersecurity stuff, but the Move It, which was a data breach, hits John Hopkins and other healthcare systems. And then we called this out earlier this year about the nursing school scam, but defendants in South Florida nursing school scam await sentencing. And then last, ACO, how 4 questions can reduce costs and boost hospice utilization, part of ACOs. So from my perspective, there was a whole bunch, Mark, from just as far as quality of articles. Any final thoughts from you?
Well, it's an interesting mix, a full plate of issues for people to consider, and it's a great argument for why a successful post-acute C-suite leader should not be safely ensconced in her or his long, tall, narrow silo, but instead should be peeking out over the edge of that and looking at issues management and doing environmental scans and recognizing that just because that issue isn't in my backyard today doesn't mean it won't be in my backyard tomorrow, the next day, the next month, the next year.
That is so well said, Mark. I actually had lunch recently with a much older board member of where I grew up a lot of my career, 4 seasons. And this person had been on the board probably 20-something years ago. And we were just talking about all the complication. He said, the CEO 20 years ago would be blown away by the complexity that you guys are facing now. And so kudos to you, because this is why you do Hospice News Today. When I tell people start to email me, hey, where can I get a copy of this article, that article? Reach out to Mark and I. You could get subscribed to Hospice News Today. We'll also be glad to share with you some of these target articles that we cite in this month. So, Mark, I think that's probably a perfect segue to the quote this month. I think this one is right on point. This is from a lady named Mary Ellen. It says, you need to understand your market potential, and who your competitors are. Keep in mind that none of these factors are always obvious. Competitive intelligence isn't just collecting information on known competitors. It's also understanding industrial or market changes and technologies that can make your product or business obsolete. And I feel like that's right on point. So, Mark, thank you as always. Thanks for the work that you do. And thanks to our listeners for listening to TCN Talks.